Hi friends, welcome to our channel 27 CICS. If you do like our content, please like, share, comment, subscribe and press the bell icon. The main intention of our channel is to provide CICS training, and this video is all about CICS resources and DevOps before DevOps. Let's begin. The main prerequisites for this video are our previous videos. Those are introduction to CICS, ZOS storage concepts, the magic inside CICS, and let's peep into CICS Brain. We would strongly recommend you watch these 4 videos ahead of watching this video so that it will give you a better understanding. The learning objectives of this video is describe how you define CICS resources and the DevOps journey, and this is just our personal way to see things and use CSS transactions to define and manage resources. Okay, what exactly CSS resources mean and what exactly defining them means is, for example, application developer has coded a program and his intention is to run it in CSS. Okay, for that, coding it and compiling it and generating a load module doesn't alone suffice. Okay, we need to have equivalent definition of that program and the transaction that triggers that program and the resources which the program might use, for example, like files, queues, or anything. And if you want to run that transaction, you need a terminal defined as well. So all these are called as resources in terms of CSS. So to make your program work, you need to have this resources defined in your CSS system before you try attempting running your program. Okay, and the below are this covers most of the interface available as on date, and all the methods you can treat are the methods which we can use as on date to define a CSS resource. So firstly, like we can use CICS Explorer to define a CSS resource, or we can use the bundles. Okay, one thing with bundles is like you club multiple resources as a bundle, but whereas when you disable the bundle, even all those resources they get disabled in one shot. Okay, that we need to keep in mind. And we can use another CSS tool, that is Kixplex BAS services, that is business application services, to define resources. Okay, and the most important one, or the most widely and commonly used method, is resource definition online, in short called as RDO, and this video mainly focuses on the RDO. Okay, and apart from these above interfaces, we also have the system programming interfaces like the exec CSS SPA commands, like exec CSS create and exec CSS CSD commands. Okay, by using which we can define CSS resources. And also we have an offline batch utility, that is DFH which can be used to define CSS resources. And there's something called as automatic installation, in short called as auto install feature, which is supported by a few set of resources. Not every resource can be auto installed, but a few set of resources like programs, terminals, maps, uh, partition sets, etc. Okay, and we also have macro definitions. Okay, we can use assembler macros to define your CSS resources. Okay, and if you see at the end, for few interfaces I have marked with an asterisk, what exactly that means is you don't actually define a definition by using those methods or interfaces. You directly install a particular resource of your choice into the active CSS system. Okay, yeah, and this slide talks about the repositories. Okay, when we say you define a CSS resource, okay, you will be storing it somewhere. Okay, the location, this may not be a complete list, but it covers most of them. Okay, the prime location would be your CSD file. CSD files stands for CACS system definition file. It's a vsem ksds file. Okay, and this is the prime location where many of the customers as on date define their resources. Okay, and it's very simple and easy as well, easy to maintain. Okay, so they prefer to use this CSD methodology a lot. Okay, and yeah, when you use Kixplex BAS, the resources gets defined in the Kixplex data repository. Okay, and when you use CSS bundles as the interface, then the place where the definitions get stored is your Unix file system, that is ZFS. Okay, in case if you choose to use macro resource definitions, then the resources get stored in the form of a load module, that is your program library. Okay, and one thing you need to keep it in mind is just defining a CSS resource will not be helpful. Okay, CSS will not be aware, or you will not be able to use that resource, but the resource has to be installed, or an entry has to be made into the active CSS system or CSS memory. Okay, only then a resource will be really active and you will be able to use it. Okay, so that we need to keep in mind, and as we progress further in this video, you will get more clarity on that. Yeah, we just dedicated a slide for macros, so it's a bit outdated as on date, and uh, a very less number of customers, or for less number of reasons they use this, but it's good to know like how things were when CACS started. Okay, this was a prime method with which, or the only method with which resources were defined. Okay, in the earlier stages of CSS. Okay, and on the right hand side it shows the CSS memory or the CSS transaction server. Okay, and these are the resources which we define till as on date using the macros. Okay, those are non-SNA networks or non-SNA LUs, non-vsem files like bdam, and so on and so forth. Okay, and for these particular resources we still use macros, and the way macros work is a bit different when compared to the other methodologies. Okay, as we discuss macros or assembler macros, where you need to first have the sample. Okay, I mean the source ready with the resources which you want to define and the attributes you want to choose for those particular kind of resources. Okay, and once your source is ready, just like any other assembler program, you need to assemble and link it, and then once the load library, I mean the load module is created, that load library where you have stored that load module has to be placed in the DFH RPL, okay, of a region JCL. And when the CSS region is brought up during the initialization, that load module will be loaded into your CSS memory, and the resources present in that load module will be uh, made aware to the CSS region, or they'll be stored in the CSS memory. Okay, so this process looks a bit tedious, and also it has some disadvantages with this design. Okay, because whenever you want to make a change, or whenever you want to add something new, um, for things to get refreshed, though you can update the source even though the CSS region is running, but for the changes to take effect, okay, the CSS region has to be stopped and started. Okay, so you're creating an outage to implement a change. Okay, so that was bit disadvantage, and maintaining the source itself is a tedious process, and even if you miss a small attribute, it can cause to an outage. Okay, so let's see how IBM has overcome this disadvantage. Okay, so in 1983, okay, we call this as the DevOps era or approach in CICS before the DevOps concept itself has come out. Okay, what IBM has done is it has completely changed the way resource definition was being done. Okay, from macros, it has shifted to something called as RDOs, that is resource definition online. Okay, in this method they have made it very simple. Okay, wherein they have cut down lot of outages, we could say. Okay, instead of having an assembler source, you can define CSS resource definitions, okay, into a vsem ksts file that is called as dfhcsd. Okay, and the CSD stands for CSS system definition file. Okay, and you can define n number of resources of any category which CSS supports into this file. Okay, by using these three transactions support defining and managing the resources. Okay, those are CEDA, CEDB, and CEDC. Okay, so once you define the definitions, the resource definitions, then they should be installed from this vsem file into your CSS memory. Then those resources will become active or available to your CSS region. Okay, so with this method, because these are the transactions, okay, and you can run anytime once your region is up and running. Okay, so you don't need any outage or to make any changes. You don't have to bring down and bring up your CSS region. So this methodology has really fastened up the development. Okay, so the developers doesn't have to wait for the region to be bounced to test their changes, okay, or promote their changes. So once their code is ready and promoted into the CSS region, along with that you can even promote the definitions online and you can start using your code. Okay, so yeah, that is the reason we call this as a DevOps approach before DevOps has really come into this world. Okay, and another offline utility which we talked earlier was DFHCSDUP. Okay, there is a batch utility which IBM has provided wherein you can define CSS resources. Okay, for running this utility, your region doesn't have to be up and running even when there's a downtime in that region. You can still run this utility and define the resources into your DFHCSD. Okay, but in the previous slide and this slide, there's a slight difference where you don't see a connectivity between the CSD file and the CSS region. That is because the DFHCSD UP utility doesn't install the resources. Okay, whereas your CEDA transaction can install the resources which you defined in the CSD file into your CSS region. Okay, so there are a few set of differences between the batch utility, that is DFHCSD UP, and the online transactions like CEDA, CEDB, and CEDC. Here we are not discussing that, but it's good to uh, take a look at them in Knowledge Center. Okay. Yeah, you might think like why we have three transactions for defining CSS resources, that is CEDA, CEDB, and CEDC. Okay, let's see the differences. There is subtle difference between all these three. Okay, but it's always good if you know the difference and make good use of them. Okay, let's start from bottom to top, that is CEDC. Okay, by using CEDC, you can just read the contents of DFHCSD file. That means uh, only the existing resource definitions can be read by using CEDC. Okay, you cannot write anything new, or you cannot update anything which is existing by using CEDC. Okay, this is considered to be the safest transaction. Okay, where you can give the access to your application folks as well. Okay, by using that they can check what resources are currently available in that region. Okay, coming to set B, by using this transaction you can both read and write from the CSD file. Okay, so this has better access control when compared to set C. Okay, and again moving on to CEDA. Okay, even just like set B, you can do a read or a write of the contents present inside your CST. You can update the existing resources as well. And apart from all this, what SetB can do, it can do one extra thing, that is, it can install the resources present inside your DFH CST into your CSS transaction server. That is the reason we have uh, identified that install with this arrow mark. Okay, but this is a unidirectional arrow mark, so that means you can only install things from your CST file into your CICS region, but you cannot read what is there inside CSS memory using CEDA. Okay, if you have gone through our earlier video, that is let's peep into CSS brain, where we have explained like the install resources can be read or modified using a different transaction, that is CEMT. Okay, so the resources which are installed inside your CSS memory can be managed using a different transaction called CEMT. Okay, and whenever you define a resource, okay, it's always something you need to keep in mind, that is the resource hierarchy. Okay, so if you maintain this tree level hierarchy, then your resource definition is considered to be complete. Okay, so let's start this analyzing this from bottom to top. Okay, the bottom level is the resource itself. Okay, the resource could be a transaction, a program, or file, anything which CSS supports. Okay, so how you define a resource is by using the define command, that is CEDA define. Okay, or the batch dfhcsdup define, anything does the same work. Okay, and when you define a resource, you tag those resources to something called as group. Okay, so group is nothing but it's a logical form. Okay, uh, which groups together a bunch of resources. Okay, so in this case here these set of transactions and these set of programs are bunched under a logical name called HR. Okay, how do you create a group? We cannot create a group. Okay, when you define a resource, there is a mandatory palm called as group. Okay, so the first resource you tag to a group or define to a group, then that group gets created. Okay, so with one single command, that is define, so you define a resource and tag it to a group, and in the backend you create a group as well. Okay, but explicitly we cannot create a group. It is all done as a part and parcel when you define a resource. Okay, so once you have defined a resource and tagged it to a group, you need to do another additional step, that is add this group to a list. Okay, for example, if you see the HR group contains some bunch of transactions and programs, and the payroll group contains some set of files. Okay, but here if you go one level up, the HR group and the payroll group are added to a list called testing. Okay, why this extra addition? Oh, and adding a group to a list is done with CEDA add or dfhcsdup add command. Okay, just like group, you cannot create a list explicitly. When you add a group to a list, it gets created. Okay, and you can add multiple groups to a single list or multiple resources to a single group as shown in this picture. Okay, you will understand why we do this extra layer of adding a group to a list. Okay, so in the coming slide, like, it will be clear for you. But just remember, whenever you are defining any sort of resource definition, ensure you follow this three-level hierarchy. Okay, only then your resource is considered to be complete and will work for any run of CICS. Okay, so as I mentioned earlier, it's not just about defining a resource. Okay, just merely defining a resource will not serve the purpose, because CICS will not be aware. Because defining a resource, it gets stored in different repositories based on the different interfaces you use to define a resource. So a resource will be available to CSS only when it is installed and present in CSS memory. Okay, so this slide talks about how do you install a resource. So basically, like, we have categorized into two categories of install, that is the dynamic install and the permanent install. The dynamic install is nothing but we use CEDA install command. Okay, and this is a syntax where you can install a single group, single resource, or you can install the resources present in a group, or the resources present in a list. Okay, uh, yeah, what happens is when you give a CEDA install group, let's go back to the previous slide. Okay, when you give CEDA install group, for example, when you give CEDA install group HR, what happens is CSS looks for the resources which you have tagged to this group. Okay, so it installs these two transactions and these two programs. Okay, whenever if the same CEDA install command is given at a list level, for example, you're given CEDA install testing, what happens is it first checks what all groups present under that list, that is HR and payroll in this case, and then it goes further down and tries to install the resources present under HR and then under payroll. Okay, so that's how this CEDA install works. And this is for a dynamic install. Okay, when we say dynamic install, the resources will be available for that run of CSS, but once the CSS is recycled, they may or may not get installed based on the hierarchy you maintained. Okay, and it all depends on the permanent install method. Okay, so let's see what is this permanent install means. Okay, to support the permanent install, like if we have defined a resource definition, okay, and we have followed all the three levels of hierarchy which was mentioned in the previous slide. Okay, to make that resource get installed in any run of CICS, okay, we need to have one extra parameter into consideration, that is the group list sitpam. Okay, there is a sit parameter called as group list, okay, which supports four lists, okay, as parameters. What happens is when you code those lists under this palm, okay, so CSS, whenever it comes up, okay, it start checking for those lists, and then it scans through the groups added to that list, and then it scans to the resources added to that groups, and then it starts installing those resources. Okay, in case if you have created this list, okay, called testing, and it has couple of resources, but you failed or you forgot to add that testing list under the group list, all your resources will not be installed. Okay, that we need to keep it in mind. And this parameter only supports four specific lists, and also it supports generic lists. When I say generic lists, you can use wildcards like asterisk or plus symbol. Okay, so whatever list matches those list names, all those resources under that list will get installed. Okay, for example, in this case, group list CSS HT star. So whatever list names come under this generic list, or qualifies this uh, CSS HT suffix, okay, uh, prefix, they will be scanned, and those resources will be installed. Okay, and here if you see in the other example, they have given four specific lists. So CSS will only scan these specific lists, and all the resources under that specific list will be uh, installed. Okay, so it's up to you how you want to define your group list. And there's a default list called provided by IBM, okay, which contains the system resources. That is the DFH list, and that is the default. If you don't specify any list, so that would be the default list, and all your system related resources will be present under this DFH list. Okay, that is how IBM promotes its own CSS system related resources. Okay, well, yeah, here in this slide we have shown you some CEDA examples. Okay, whenever you type in CEDA, and then CEDA can do a lot number of commands. Okay, one important command is define. Okay, so once you type in CEDA define, so these are the options, or these are the resources which you can define under CEDA. Okay, uh, yeah, for example, if you have selected CEDA defined transaction, okay, and you provide some name, okay, and these are the attributes which will be shown to you, and you need to fill the mandatory attributes, the rest will be defaulted. Okay, so once you hit enter, it says define successful. In case if there is any error, so it clearly tells you here like what is the error, and if there are multiple errors, then you can press F9 and check those errors and rectify, and then hit enter, so your definition will be successful. Okay, so yeah, these are some examples of define. Okay, you can define a program. As I said, you cannot just define a resource, it has to be tagged to a group. Okay, so that is the reason define program and then followed by the group name. Okay, and there will be other attributes once you hit this command, like we have shown in the earlier slide. So you have to fill all those and hit enter, then your resource will be defined. Okay, so this is the example to define a transaction, this is the example to define a terminal, and another program. And once you are defined, if you are interested to display like with what attributes you are defined as so and so resource, you can very well do that by using CEDA display command. You can display at a group level, you can display this displays all the groups present in your CST, and this displays all the groups present in your CST starting with prod and followed by just 3 characters. Okay, so a 7-letter group which is prefixed as prod will be displayed, and the last command is used to display all the lists present in your CST file. Okay, and you can very well display a particular resource of your choice. Okay, you just have to give program n star or program star, and you need to provide a group value, or a group asterisk also could do. Okay, try to avoid asterisks as much as you can, because it might consume some amount of CPU because it is scanning through your DFH CSD file. If it is very big, then it might take time as well. Okay, yeah, and as we discussed, there is a hierarchy where you need to add a group to the list, right, to follow the 3-level hierarchy. So this is the command how to do that. So CEDA add group to a list, so that will be taken care. And when you add a group to a list, it's not sorted in alphabetical order, it's on a time basis. Like the last added will be the last group which gets installed. Okay, it doesn't get sorted based on the alphabetical order. Okay, so if you want to jumble the order, it can be done, it is possible by using these before and after commands, so that your groups and the definitions present inside those groups will be installed in a particular order of your choice, because there are a few resource definitions where they need to be installed in a particular order. Okay, so in such case you can use this before and after commands, and you can add a group in between two lists as well. That is possible. We have reached the end of this video. Okay, and thanks for watching the video. If you like this video, please like, share, comment, subscribe, and press bell icon. Okay, for any queries or training requirements, please do email us at 27css@gmail.com. Thank you.